Welcome back, everybody, after a hearty lunch. We promised to keep everybody at the edge of their seats while we're digesting this nice lunch we had. So stay tuned for a really exciting set of talks on the future of genomic and health data. I think this day is really culminates really an exciting meeting. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Laszlo Radvanyi. I'm the President and Scientific Director of the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research. We've been supporting Global Alliance for Genomics and Health right from its inception. Peter Goodhand is, as a fellow Torontonian, works with me at OICR, and we've been really proud and to really support the working of the Global Alliance. We've been supporting it both financially as well as our scientists, 350 or more or so strong in Toronto, have been performing a lot of in-kind research through our genomics platform, computational biology platform, and supporting the various driver projects in the Global Alliance. Before we go into our talks, I just wanted to sort of bring my perspective as the President and Scientific Director of the Ontario Institute of Cancer Research, or OICR. I've been in oncology research, mostly immuno-oncology research for many, many years, both in academia, biotech, and in large pharma, where I recently co-led global efforts at EMD Serono. And I just wanted to sort of bring you at least my perspective about, what is the playing field and why am I here and why am I interested in why is what Global Alliance is doing in data integration to drive future AI platforms so critical in oncology. And it's really summarized, I guess, in this slide, and that is I really feel that after the gains we've made over the last century in chemotherapy, radiation therapy, immunotherapy, in leading to really major improvements in patient clinical benefit and survival, I think we're at a danger of reaching an asymptote right now, especially in our new age of precision medicine, where we're trying to deal with patients in a personalized way in which we're dealing with each person's cancer as a sort of called a rare disease. This is just an example of what we're dealing with in the immuno-oncology space. The added complexity of combinations. It's going to be now all about combination therapy, double, triple combinations, to avoid resistance and escape clonal variants in cancer. But you can see on the slide on the right, I mean, there's just an immense amount of combinations. And right now, if you look at the number of phase 1, 2, and 3 trials, especially phase 1 trial in combination therapy, this is from a recent review, it's just ballooning. And how do we deal with this complexity? Right now, from 2010, where it on average took about $1.1 billion to create a new drug, it now costs $2.1 to $2.6 billion. It's on average 10 years of drug development, and less than 12% make it. So clearly we need better solutions on how to do oncology drug development, and especially to avoid the ballooning costs of cancer drugs and, of course, combination therapies. So what's important to me then as an oncologist is really embracing this digital transformation and really integrating this digital transformation, the work of groups like Global Alliance in combining multi-omic data sets and real-world evidence to really reverse this trend, is to really come up with new ways of doing things. We need to generate big data now, multiple types, structured clinical data from registered, current and past trials, peer-reviewed papers, traditional clinical data through AHRs, imaging radiomics, labs, pharmacies. Real-world data, I think, is now becoming more and more important, patient-reported outcomes. And this real-world data really involves biomarkers. Biomarkers is really real-world data. And supplemental data, such as economics and demographics that we just learned about. In Ontario, the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research is really, in our next strategic plan, one of the goals we have, or one of the opportunities and initiatives we are embarking on, is really linking cancer centers across Ontario together to sort of bring together an integrated data platform, healthcare data, cohort studies, clinical trial data, lab studies, and databases in a unified way, as OICR being sort of a central hub facilitator for this across the province. And what we're hoping to do is then merge this with a really interesting and really exciting initiative that's now being undertaken in Canada, spearheaded by the Terry Fox Research Institute, and that is called the Marathon of Hope Cancer Center Network. And the idea here is to finally bring, provinces across Canada together and cancer centers across Canada to share data, clinical data, multi-omic data, in a patient-centric, unified, interinstitutional way. And the Marathon of Hope Cancer Center Initiative is piloting a study with 15,000 patients. It's received a large tranche of funding from the federal government to do this. And as shown on the right-hand side, it's really about patients, about linking patients with researchers, taking the data, linking hospitals together, and then doing the best science and identifying the best scientific questions that would, and the best tools to combine data that will then empower AI-based modalities. And we have, how we're approaching this is through sort of public-private partnerships in this model. And the other interesting point is that the data that's going to be generated from the Marathon of Hope is also going to be linked into the ICGC Argo initiative, which, as you know, is one of the driver projects that's sequencing 100,000 cancer patient genomes, transcriptomes, linked with clinical data internationally. The other area that I think is very important for us now in cancer is to focus more on cancer detection and optimizing earlier interventions. We need population health studies and to generate large integrated genomic data, transcriptomic data, linking genomics and environment. And also, there's a tremendous opportunity to track existing germline cancer susceptible gene carriers or previvors before they actually get cancer. And also, going and working more in the earlier stage cancer space in connection with that by pushing more neoadjuvant studies and biomarker-driven clinical trials that will inform late-stage trials. And so one of the initiatives that we've had going in Canada now for over a decade that I see, all of us and other population health studies being mentioned here, but CPTP, which is the Canadian Partnerships for Tomorrow, somehow doesn't make it on these slides. And I just wanted to remind people that Canada has had this population health study now going for over a decade, and actually we were one of the first countries to actually embark on a population health study, which is, as shown in the slide, is an integration of centers all across Ontario to then follow individuals for many years, including their susceptibility to cancer and how environmental and genomic factors influence that. And so we're really collecting data now in one out of every 100 Canadians and linking to cancer registry databases as well as other disease registries. And OICR, together with the University of Toronto School of Public Health, is jointly sort of the co-leaders of this project. And so I think the last slide one of the last slides I want to show is that what do I feel we're heading towards in order to improve this problem of our drug development. And I think I'm looking at a future, and this is just peering into the future, where hopefully through all these efforts of generating large data, integrating data not only nationally but internationally through the work of Global Alliance and other entities, where we're going to have AI-guided biomarkers that are going to be helping us find the candidate biomarkers and candidate drug targets for different diseases. And then we'll be using very novel platforms such as organ-on-a-chip, organoids, body-on-a-chip screens, which are now emerging through our efforts, multiple efforts in bioengineering and biotechnology centers all across the world, which will then identify the top drug candidates. And then AI can also be used to then identify who are the best study candidates right from the beginning to go into the early stage trials, not just all-comer trials. And also, what are the best sites, what are the best clinical scenarios to start these trials. And then these trials will then incorporate real-world evidence and biosensors. And then very quickly we can identify best compounds that can rapidly, through an adaptive design, move into phase 2 or 3 trials, where then we then collect automated data and collection and analysis. And I think through these efforts, I think hopefully what we'll be doing is increasing the success rate and decreasing the costs of drug development. And so this sort of then comes into what our speakers are going to be talking about, and that is what are the challenges of really generating and integrating and dealing and sharing large genomic and multi-omic data sets. And so we have really 3 very illustrious speakers here that are world-renowned in their field. Jean-Pierre Hubaux from EPFL in Switzerland, who's going to talk about big data challenges and privacy, security, and in complexity, and the role of encryption and de-encryption, and what the experience has been in Switzerland, the Swiss experience. And then followed by Meng from BGI in China, who, as you know, they've had a very impressive initiative to large genomics, data integration and sequencing initiatives across China. And he'll talk about also how they're using blockchain-based data sharing. And then lastly, we'll have Teresa, Zayas Caban from NIH, who will talk about the fast healthcare interoperability resources and how they're developing the standards for healthcare digital data exchange and information modeling. So with that said, I'd like to invite Jean-Pierre to come up and give us talk. He's a full professor at EPFL. He's the director of the recently created Center for Digital Trust, and he's probably one of the most cited researchers in this field of data security. So, Jean-Pierre, thank you.
Dear colleagues, dear friends, bonjour. So I'm going to talk about the Swiss perspective, although we do have a number of collaborations, including with the Harvard Medical School. Why is the Swiss case interesting for privacy-conscious medical data sharing? For a number of reasons. First of all, the quality of the medical data, the stability of the population, the very, very stringent data protection regulations. In other words, if something works in Switzerland, it is certainly usable elsewhere, even in Germany. It's also the only place, believe it or not, the only place in Europe with a project that is focused on data protection for person's health. And the Switzerland as a whole, as you may know, is a very federal, decentralized country with just 8.5 million inhabitants, and yet it's comprised of 26 cantons. So you have to think of those as mini-states, each with its own parliament and legislation, with all the implications that this can have. So in other words, the idea is that Switzerland can be a kind of a test bed for something that would be then run at a larger scale. I'm coming from information security and applied crypto. I'm not a bioinformatician, so I'm looking at this problem also in my capacity of co-chair of the data security work stream. My feeling is that genome privacy and security is really a grand challenge for mankind. Because of the required duration of the protection, because of the growing amount of data that is involved, the fact that in some cases millions of patient records have to be, let's say, used for specific studies, the fact that the data is not necessarily completely clean, is noisy, there are correlations within the genomes, across genomes with a given kinship and ethnicity. And then the complex ecosystem of semi-trusted stakeholders, the research centers, the sequencing facilities, the hospitals, the genetic analysis labs, the private doctors, and so on. So it's quite a diverse ecosystem, and there is a diversity of applications. Sometimes strange things happen across boundaries between healthcare, medical research, forensics, and ancestry. Right? The good news is that there exist a number of technologies for privacy and security protection that are extremely well known in computer science. There is traditional encryption, something that we use permanently when we go to the internet. As soon as we, for example, access an HTTPS website, well, this activates both asymmetric and symmetric crypto. There's homomorphic encryption that protects computation in untrusted environments, and that I'm going to let's say, devote a couple of slides to this concept, as well as secure multi-party computation that enables computations across different stakeholders. I'm going to address this as well. There are also hardware-based solutions. Intel SGX, for example, is an example of those. So with, let's say, secure enclaves where computations can take place. There are pros and cons for these kind of solutions. There's differential privacy, more on the statistical front. I have also one or two slides on this. And finally the famous and infamous blockchain. Right? So I'm going to talk also about that approach. So question is where to store the data? This is a recurrent question that arises also in the framework of GA4GH. Either keep them on premises, which is typically what has to be done in Switzerland, because there is an unwillingness to, at least for the moment, to upload the data to the cloud. Or put them on the commercial cloud, and then in this way take advantage of the well-known strength of the cloud. So there's these two options. Now, actually, even if the cloud is untrusted, it is possible to make use of the cloud by making use of homomorphic encryption. Let me just give you here a very simple example. So on the bottom of the slide, you see a researcher, and she is willing to upload two numbers, but actually these two numbers are not meant to be seen or understood by the cloud. So she wants to upload 3 and 5, but not the plain version, not the plain text version. It's the encryption of 3 and the encryption of 5. This is what she does, and she retains the keys. So the cloud cannot know, just sees, let's say, a string of bits, but does not know to what let's say, clear text value this corresponds to. And then she can ask the cloud to perform operations on the encrypted value. Right? And say, please compute me the sum of the values that are encrypted there. So compute me the encryption of the outcome, the result of 3 plus 5. So encryption of 3 plus 5. So the cloud is going to compute the encryption of 8 without knowing that it is an 8. Right? It sounds like black magic, but it works. It's Wikipedia stuff, it's textbook stuff, it's proven mathematically. It has been around for 30 years. Until now, it was not too much used because the overhead that it induced was way too heavy. But now, with a number of improvements that have been brought, it is becoming usable, and I think it's of high relevance to this community. And this is a more formal presentation of the thing. I think you got the gist. I'll spare you the, let's say, technicalities. But in a nutshell, the idea is that you can either compute values and then encrypt them, or encrypt and then compute. Right? And so if you can go either way, and you're going to obtain the same result. So now, this is vis-a-vis the cloud. Now, if there are multi-site studies in which the different sites are unwilling to dump all the data in one single place, so we assume that sites do not trust each other even, then a possible solution is something called secure multi-party computation. Right? So a bit formally, what this means is that assume there is a set of players, P1, P2 to Pn, and they would like to compute a function that is a function of each of their inputs. So each player has one input, which can be a vector, a matrix, whatever. So, but let's call these inputs x1, x2, up to xn, right? And so each of them has this input and is unwilling to show this input to the other ones, right? So in spite of this constraint, it is possible to run a protocol without involving a trusted third party, such that each of them is going to compute to receive the result it is entitled to receive. So assume each of them is entitled to receive a result y1, y2, etc. up to yn. Well, the protocol unfolds. I spare you the painful technicalities, replaced by this simple animation. And then each of them at the end is going to have to receive the output that it is entitled to receive, which can be the same, right? All the y's can be the same value, or they can be different. Again, this is Wikipedia stuff, textbook stuff, and for the same reasons as for homomorphic encryption, so far it was not much used, but it is becoming usable. And there is also something called differential privacy, that is a way to calibrate the protection against nosy or somewhat, let's say, overly curious researchers that is, I guess, known to most of you. So the idea here is that it's a way to calibrate by how much the computation over a given database is going to be modified if you introduce one additional entry in that database. So if you're to reassure, let's say, a patient about, signing the consent, say you can do this because in any case, your inclusion in the database is not going to modify the outcomes of the computation more than by that much. Right? So now, let's move to Switzerland. So the project I'm talking about is the data protection in personal health. So it is an assertively multidisciplinary project that brings together an ethicist, a specialist of machine learning, a geneticist, a specialist and evangelist for blockchain and decentralized trust, and myself. And the goal here is to set not only recommendations and standards, but also to deploy tools. As long as we haven't deployed tools and I'm talking about here mostly clinical, not just research, clinical. So we go for the hard stuff. We have to show that the tools work in clinical environments, right? So the envision, so this is a map of Switzerland, as you have immediately recognized. And so the idea is to be able to support questions such as, for example, how many patients with BRCA1 and breast cancer do we have in the country? Or what is the survival rate for cancer patients undergoing a given chemotherapy? So very naive and simple questions. But even today, still today, it is relatively difficult, if not impossible, to ask this question smoothly because the data are siloed. And so we will remove the barriers among these silos, to enable these questions and then to facilitate and to actually empower the tumor boards, for example, with much better and accurate data. Oncology and rare diseases are typically the application areas we have in mind. So for this purpose, we have developed what we call the Medco software stack that combines, let's say, medical informatics tools with things that we have developed in-house. So what we've developed is called Unlinks. It's a privacy-preserving computing framework that we have interfaced with I2B2. It doesn't have to be I2B2, but I2B2 is something that is well understood and widespread, so we believe it's a way to facilitate the adoption. So what it provides is a certain number of functionalities, relatively simple ones, so sum, the variance, set intersection, cosine similarity, linear regression, logistic regression. And so we are currently moving up the food chain of functions. All this in a combination of homomorphic and secure multi-party computation protection. So in such a way that the data never leave the data provider premises. There is this, let's say, extreme Swiss caution, if you wish, in action here. And on the side of privacy, the query only sees the final result aggregated among multiple data providers. So if I show you now a brief demo of how this works, fingers crossed. Yes. So this is what we are going to see here is the interface that is perceived by a researcher. The researcher is going to log in, and we assume the researcher is interfacing a conglomerate of 3 hospitals that are involved here. The researcher here is interested in a specific cancer. Which cancer is it? Well, it's actually melanoma. So she selects melanoma, and then homomorphically there is a computation of how many patients in the current databases correspond to this criterion. So the computation takes place in a homomorphic space. The result is there are 633 subjects of this kind, and then she can refine her request by mentioning the gene, the annotation value. So we go here for a BRAF, and then take all the zygosities, and then the next aspect, the next criterion is going to be the annotation value. The annotation value that she chooses is a V600E, and then all these criteria go into the computation. They are, so again, sending the algorithm to the data. Computations take place in the 3 nodes, and then the system is going to deliver the, let's say, the distribution of the let's say, information about the presence of all the patients whose characteristics match these criteria. In this way, it allows a very fast support of the exploration of the cohort. And then once the cohort has been, okay, this is about the scalability test. We have stress tested the whole thing. This has been run over data sets that are up to 28 billion data points, so it's quite sizable. And actually, with appropriate optimization, we found a way to have an addition, let's say, an overhead of the security layer that is in the order of 2 seconds. So it's, we believe, highly acceptable, considering the runtime of the database itself is in the order of tens of seconds. Once we have explored, then we have to move to the analysis. For the analysis, for example, we want to do, just a toy example, linear regression, so the best line that fits these 6 dots. If all the information is available at the same place, then it's a trivial problem. You can do, for example, gradient descent. But if they are not, so if the data is decentralized, and you want to do a linear regression or logistic regression, for example, then it becomes more difficult, because then the gradient descent can lead to completely erratic results. And so what we have done is to develop a protocol that supports, let's say, that is comprised of these different phases, creation of the encrypted summary, and then the summaries are collectively aggregated and then shuffled as a further, let's say, precaution, and then this delivers the final result. Blockchain in 1 second. So blockchain is something that we believe can be useful in order to keep track of the logs of the requests that are generated to let's say, a confederation of institutions that can also be used to keep track of the essentially consent of patients. Okay, we maintain a website where we keep track of the activities in this field. There's a Genomic that was mentioned previously that took place yesterday and the day before. And this brings me to my conclusion. So protecting health data is one of the most formidable challenges of cybersecurity, probably the most formidable one. And what is at stake is no less than human dignity and democracy. And actually, the advent of molecular medicine is going to make things more challenging because the risk is increasing, and the conventional medical approach that consists in de-identifying does not work anymore because the data itself is identifying. So distributed cohorts, as has been mentioned multiple times in these days, will play a key role, and there are a number of solutions. And we believe that Switzerland can be a test bed for the data sharing under strict regulations. And so we have developed and are deploying open source tools, and we're currently dealing with the hospitals to make those.
Great, thank you, Jean-Pierre. And as we did before, we'll leave the questions till the end in a panel. I'd like to introduce Teresa Zayas Caban from the NIH, Office of the National Coordinator for Health IT. She's the Chief Scientist at ONC and responsible for developing and evaluating overall scientific efforts and activities. And so we'll be talking about ONC's Precision Medicine Initiative and trends that will impact approaches in genomic health data in the future. And she'll tell us about HL7 Fire.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. It is truly a pleasure and an honor to be here. It's been a great to almost 3 days of discussion and conversation, and it's been a really learning experience for me. And I've honestly felt very welcomed by the community here. As Laszlo said, I'm Chief Scientist at the Office of the National Coordinator for Health IT. I'm also currently on loan to the National Institutes of Health, which means that when I travel, I carry 2 laptops now. And so it has been oddly reassuring to hear conversations and realize that we are facing the same problems. I suppose I come to you from healthcare. Initially, ONC is an office that sits within the Office of the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. It was created under executive order under the Bush administration in 2004 and authorized through legislation when the stimulus package, the Recovery Act, passed in 2009. Its role has really been to promote the adoption of standardized and certified health information technology and facilitate the secure use and exchange of interoperable health information, as well as foster delivery of safe and high-quality care. In other countries, this office is usually the digital health program, and sometimes it could be a separate department. It can be part of the Ministry of Health. Sometimes it's part of the Ministry of Health and also part of the care delivery system. The passage of the Recovery Act not only created ONC in statute, but also created a set of incentives managed by our sister agency, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, for clinicians in hospitals to adopt and meaningfully use certified electronic health record technology. And the certification piece of that has fallen on ONC's, under ONC's authority. So our superpower is that we can regulate health IT system. And since then, the incentives have actually been successful in the sense that today, almost 10 years later, certified health IT is used by almost 80% of eligible physicians, as well as well over 90% of hospitals across the U.S. Lest you think this is only a U.S. phenomenon, we're actually involved with something called the Global Digital Health Partnership, where over 26 countries have come together to collaborate and coordinate on digital health efforts. And you will not guess what the number 1 priority is: interoperability. And so we've gotten these systems in place, but now we need to get the data to move from one place to another for care and for other purposes as well. Enter the 21st Century Cures Act. So this was passed in December of 2016. It was a bipartisan bill. It had support across all sectors of Congress, and it really created both mechanisms for NIH and FDA to be able to innovate and accelerate discovery and delivery of treatment and cures. It actually started as something to facilitate the advancement of cures to market, but Congress also saw fit to include provisions in there related to health information technology and interoperability. And ONC is implementing many of those provisions through regulation. My work at ONC focuses on the intersection of healthcare and research, and we really see health IT as foundational to research. And so while ONC's purview is strictly healthcare delivery, the same interoperability that will work for clinical care systems will also be of benefit to researchers who want to use clinical data in their studies. And so making usable electronic health information readily available and easily transferable to patients, providers, and researchers is fundamental to research endeavors, in particular precision medicine. My division, and ONC in particular, does not fund research, but we certainly partner with the NIH, the Food and Drug Administration, and other research funders to focus on projects to advance the research enterprise. We see our role as focusing on issues around data or the infrastructure. And issues around data, for example, under the precision medicine, we've been working to facilitate patient-controlled or patient-directed exchange of information from their doctors' electronic health record systems for research. We've also collaborated with Bob Freemuth from Mayo on a project called Sync for Genes to standardize the exchange of genomic health information to the point of care and also for research. And most recently, we've been collaborating with the All of Us research program at NIH, focusing on standardizing sharing of sensor and wearable data as well as social determinants of health. All topics that have come up here in the last couple of days. Our role in the Precision Medicine Initiative, which was launched in 2015, is really to accelerate collaboration around pilots and testing of standards that support interoperability for research. Now, if we go back to the Cures Act, as I mentioned, it had provisions with regards to interoperability. And those are being advanced through rulemaking. So in February of this year, ONC released a notice of proposed rulemaking with the goal of really facilitating the interoperable exchange and secure exchange of electronic health information. The statute focuses a lot on something called information blocking, and this applies primarily to care delivery, but essentially ONC is developing exceptions to information blocking, but the statute prohibits care delivery organizations and others from not permitting data to move when necessary to provide care in the US. In addition, I wanted to highlight a couple of things from the proposed regulation. One is this proposed United States Core Data for Interoperability standard. So previously, systems that were certified under ONC's program had to have the technology in place to share what was called the continuity of the CCDA, the continuity of care of record. And so this includes information such as race, ethnicity, language, smoking status, medications, and things like that. Those are the basic clinical information that needed to be able to move from one system to another. This has been renamed, and the proposed rule adds data provenance, which is very critical, not just for clinical care, but to research, clinical notes, pediatric vital signs, and then address and phone number, which would enable patient matching, particularly important for cohorts and those doing research. But in addition to specifying the kinds of data that need to move, the rule will also, moving forward, specify the standards for the data, which is important and very critical for interoperability. In addition, the rule specifies standardized application programming interfaces. And so it proposes the use of the Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resource Standard and that API specification to enable exchange of data from one electronic health record system at one site to another. Specifically, it focuses on two uses. So the initial specification, the initial API specification was designed to exchange data from one patient at a time. The rule also proposes exchanging data from multiple patients. There's a more recent specification, sometimes referred to as bulk data, sometimes referred to as flat file, that will be very critical not just for clinical care and population health management, but also for research, for you to be able to pull data from a cohort of patients at a single time, rather than pulling data from an individual patient one at a time for a given study. And so if the rule is finalized as proposed, all electronic health data will need to be exported, as well as the data dictionary that to be made available. Researchers who get data from electronic health record systems certified under ONC's program will essentially be receiving electronic health information as defined in the rule. Which leads me to a word on FHIR. This is not a talk on FHIR. If you want to talk on FHIR, you can go to the HL7 meeting. And so FHIR has really emerged as an international standard to exchange electronic healthcare information. It has been readily adopted by the healthcare sector. Today, a third of the systems that are currently certified under the most recent version of ONC certification program have API capabilities. Because of the way the EHR market works in the US, that actually translates to about over 96% of hospitals and over 3/4 of physicians organizations having some FHIR capabilities in their system. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Service also released a rule in February which would require providers to exchange claims data using FHIR. And so at least the U.S. federal government has put its weight behind the FHIR standard. In addition, it's being broadly adopted by the broader IT sector. So Amazon and Google have FHIR capabilities or FHIR services in their cloud services. Health insurers are also involved in development of FHIR specifications to exchange claims data. And then pharma has jumped on the bandwagon with an interest in sharing clinical trial information. And so with this, the National Institutes of Health saw an opportunity. As many of you may know, and I think my colleague Adam Berger is in the audience, he mentioned this yesterday during his remarks, last year NIH published its strategic plan for data science, really with the goal of modernizing NIH-funded the biomedical data science ecosystem. And it proposes to connect NIH data systems, support storage and sharing of data, increase data management and analytic capabilities, enhance the workforce, and implement good stewardship policies. Data sharing is essential to expedite translation of research and findings, and it enables us to be able to test the validity of research findings and strengthen analysis by combining data sets. NIH is also pushing for researchers to make better use of clinical data from electronic health record systems in their studies. And so data standards are really a key to the interoperability needed to advance some of these goals. And in this, they really saw an opportunity to leverage the FHIR standard. And in late July of this year, NIH published 2 related notices. One is to encourage researchers to use FHIR to extract data from electronic health record systems for the purposes of research. And the second one is, and the second purpose under that notice, is to begin to standardize research data sets to the FHIR specification to enable data sharing, data integration across studies. In addition, they released a separate small business community notice that is really encouraging the development of applications using FHIR for a whole host of purposes, including, and a lot of them are actually research functions, so identifying cohorts, access of management to data, exchanging EHR data and health documentation for research purposes, enhancing privacy and security, to Jean-Pierre's comments, inclusion of common data elements, supporting common data structure for research. And so there's really a lot of interest across NIH on this. We published a request for information late last month, and NIH is really trying to get community input into this focus moving forward. And I've included the link to the request for information. The comment period closes at the end of November. We really want people to provide input and feedback on this direction, and the ability to be able to leverage FHIR for research, what tools may be needed to effectively do so, the need for research regarding standards development, as well as opportunities and challenges with using FHIR. And then last but not least, we've also recently awarded 2 contracts to increase availability of high-quality data using FHIR. The first one was awarded to Vanderbilt University Medical Center, and with the goal of developing tools for researchers to be able to either more easily extract data out of electronic health record systems for research, or to map research data sets to the FHIR specification. And so for that, we're really going to be engaging the research community at large to get input and feedback into use cases for development, as well as the testing process. And then I'm happy to announce we also have a collaboration with GA4GH. So we awarded a contract with the Broad as serving as a host institution, and 4 different organizations are collaborating on this: Oregon State, OHSU, Mayo, and Jackson Laboratory, to really make it to provide high-quality phenotypic information both for generic research and generic medicine. And we also want to broadly engage the GA4GH community and the broader research community on this. I'd like to highlight a couple of different things with regards to my remarks that I sort of glossed over. One is that it's really critical for you all to be involved in policy making in some vein. So ONC put out this rule. There was a comment period. It's obviously closed, but it's for the policymakers to make progress that meets the needs of a broad range of stakeholders, not just clinicians, not just the vendors, not just patients or payers. It's important for the research community, the genomic research community, to be engaged in some of these efforts and provide comments when available. So I mentioned the request for information. And then the other thing is, I cannot emphasize enough the need to work collaboratively on these projects. Some of the projects that we have led at ONC have been successful because we've engaged the vendor community, the research community, the healthcare community, the standards development organization community. So I hope we will continue that tradition with these 2 projects. And with that, I think I'll close. Thank you.
Okay. As I said, I'll take the chair's prerogative, and maybe I think we have a start at 3, right, with the next plenary, right? Is that correct? So maybe we. Yeah. So okay. So why don't we take like about 6 or 7 minutes and try to get at some of these questions, because I'm sure a lot of interesting questions have emerged here. I guess I'll start with the most popular ones, which are on top. I guess Sergey is asking, how realistic is it to run common genomics algorithms, like alignment assembly, on homomorphically encrypted data? I guess that's a question for Jean-Pierre, I guess.
Yeah, so indeed, so clearly scalability is an issue, right? There can be performance problems. At the same time, what we have shown is that there are a number of tricks that can be used in order to let computations go way, way faster than just doing the brute force homomorphic encryption. I'm more than happy to talk. I mean, the technicalities are maybe a bit too deep to be answered in a few seconds. So more than happy to talk with Sergey afterwards to discuss how this can be achieved.
And then the other question here on top is blockchains. How can they grow, and how much compute power? This is a big issue that's come up with blockchains and the computing power and resources.
Okay.
Maybe something.
So yeah, I'm happy to take this one as well, if you don't mind.
Maybe Meng can comment as well. Yeah.
Or you want to?
Yeah, no, both of you.
So there should be no confusion here. There are let's say, permissionless and permission blockchains. So there are the blockchains that are used for cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin that require proof of work and that are immensely wasteful in terms of energy. So what is used, and I'm sure it's also the case in China, what is used in these, let's say, health data projects are the permission blockchains, which means that there is an a priori administrative definition of who is on board, right? Which means that there is no proof of work that is needed, and as a consequence, the consumption in terms of, let's say, electricity and computing power, etc., is absolutely negligible.
Yeah, just add some comment, I agree. So the system we are using is a permission consortium blockchain. So the consensus mechanism is different from the public chain, which is cryptocurrency usually used. So we are just using the Hybrid Ledger Fabric, which is the most popular framework to deploy blockchain. It is just possible to do that using a traditional E3 node. That is definitely enough. So each party have one consensus node and also a node for store their data.
Is there a question? Yeah, maybe we'll take a question from the audience then.
Hi. I was wondering how Switzerland and China are grappling with the challenge of pharmacy data for pharmacogenomics. Because in the UK, for example, in the NHS, we have primary care from GP records, secondary care, so hospitals, and often that's on paper. You've got high street pharmacy data. Yeah, so I was just wondering sort of how you're tackling that and getting all that data in.
Okay, for our case, if the genetic or genome company just sign a contract with pharmaceutical companies, just together develop the companion diagnosis, so we definitely together run the clinical trials with that hospital. So just by using that hospital as a central node, we share the data with the pharmaceutical companies. So any clinical samples that have a significant sign for suitable for a certain drug clinical trials, we can working together. So only can do this in terms of this way. Yeah.
Right, but traditionally, what happens is that the data that are typically at the hospital, right, and then the hospital is de-identify the data and provide them to the pharmacy, to the pharmaceutical company, and the pharmaceutical company, let's say, subsidizes the whole thing. Now, with the advent of genomics, as I mentioned in the talk, this de-identification does not work anymore, right? So we have to rethink this kind of interface, and so we are currently in discussions with a farm. Well, you know, Switzerland is known for its, notably for its, not only for its chocolate, but also for its pharma company. We are talking with them to, let's say, fine-tune this interface. I think this is a very, very important issue that you are raising. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very important. Why don't we ask a question to Teresa? Will ONC support phenopackets, and how can this overlap with ENCODE?
Well, so for the project I just announced, we'll actually be focusing on phenopackets, and NIH is supporting that specifically. ONC, through the US Core Data for Interoperability standard, will be tackling data standards one at a time. And there's processes in place for those. So the meetings where that is discussed and where new data types and data standards for those are proposed are completely open, and I'm happy to share links after the meeting.
Great. And another question for Jean-Pierre. Can you comment on concern for human dignity informs your technical work? Nice
Right.
perspective.
This is
It's
a
interesting.
fairly philosophical question.
Yeah.
So I think for a long time there was a misunderstanding between on the role of privacy. People said, "Oh, I have nothing to hide, therefore it's okay if my data are used here and there." And now, thanks to Cambridge Analytica, I think people now have understood that it's a way deeper issue. By the way, let's make a quick poll. How many of you have watched The Great Hack? Raise your hand proudly. Okay, so that's not enough. So this evening, if you have nothing better to do, please watch this documentary because it contains also, let's say, detailed information of what happened. And so the voters' manipulation is something that has been done at large scale. And so even democracy, so we are talking about really fundamental issues that are at stake. And obviously, health data are very much part of this issue, and I'm really glad that the GA4GH has its own data security work stream and also the ethics work streams that are working hand in hand to address those issues.
So I guess we'll go to one more question. Just looking at what's out there. Some of it is technical questions, and I ask that the people who are asking these questions just, interact with the speakers on those. Maybe we'll take this one here. Should publishing computational methods that purposely re-identify individuals from data sets be discouraged without proposing ways to reinforce security? Maybe Meng and Jean-Pierre can
Go ahead.
I'm not sure whether I interpret the questions correctly, but I assume that this is a kind of a paradigm that just sending algorithm to data. So also sending to de-identified data. But just as John mentioned, the genome, so I think a Columbia professor called Yaniv Ernich published a paper to demonstrate that genome data is not that can be de-identified. So I think in terms of this, so the MPC protocol and also encryption technology we are discussing, actually the algorithm is run on encrypted data. I think this kind of things add another layer of encryption and privacy protection beyond just sending those computation methods to the data.
Yeah. Great. And maybe one more we'll take as we can get another question in for Teresa before we end. FHIR adoption in Europe, European reference network level. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that. Is there a possibility?
Well, so the FHIR standard has international adoption. And so as I alluded to earlier, through the GDHP, a lot of the coordination with regards to standards adoption is taking place at the country level. And so it's not just adopted here in the US, it was actually developed by a gentleman from Australia and a colleague from Canada and someone here from the US. So it was a 3-country team that put it together.
All right, I guess that's about wraps.
This question is fun, actually.
Sorry, but I think we're running out of time. People probably need to get, as Ewan says, caffeinated in time for our next plenary speaker, which is going to be a really great experience. So thanks a lot again for a really excellent session, guys.